Welcome, everyone, to We're All Patients podcast. Today's guest on We're All Patients is the founder and CEO of Phase 1 to Clinical Trial Career Success. She's also a seasoned public health expert with over a decade of experience in clinical trial research, recruitment, and community outreach. She has led the staffing for all stages of trials, worked with the National Cancer Institute and the NIH, and played a key role in multiple successful audit outcomes. She's also passionate about expanding access to research opportunities, especially by helping physicians in underserved communities step into principal investigator roles, even with no prior experience. Let's welcome someone who truly understands the intersection of recruitment, compliance, and impact in clinical research. Zai, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Sam. I'm happy to be here.
So the biggest question I have, honestly, from the beginning is just why are only 3% of rural patients, why do only 3% participate in clinical trials?
Great question. And it ranges between less than 5%, 3% is extreme, but it really has to do with access to care. Most of the time, it's also when you look at rural communities, the age proportion is a little bit more on the elderly side, making it even more challenging for these individuals to be able to, physically go to receive care. There's also just some of the trust that's in these communities, trust factor for medicine, or knowing, when they need to go and receive care. Some of these individuals just sometimes might be so ill that they might not even realize some of the symptoms of needing care as urgently as they do need care.
Wow, so it sounds like there's a lot there, really. So a lot of headwinds, like if the population being on the elderly side, having trust factors that are associated with being enrolled in trials, knowing where to go, and just the severity of illness.
Mm-hmm. And I should add also access. In rural communities, a lot of times you have to drive significant distances in order to receive the quality of care that you're seeking for specific ailments.
So access to care is a big aspect as well. So, which brings me to another question. So why do clinical trials matter for these patients?
Sure. So the wonderful thing about clinical trials is for the patient, they will not be spending money. A lot of these individuals in rural communities also are just metrics indicate that they don't have insurance. It becomes very unaffordable for them to even obtain care. So clinical trials are cutting edge medications that otherwise may not even be available in their communities if they're rural communities. So it's bringing that level of care, but also relieving them from the expense and the burden of that as well.
Okay, so it sounds like this allows them to really be able to afford care, since and access to top tier drugs that they might not have otherwise had access to because of the expenses and kind of logistics involved.
Absolutely. These trials, they range, and we can get into what trials are, but there's different, phases of these trials. And so being able to be on the cutting edge of some of these new advances is really an opportunity, especially in these rural settings.
So what's in it for the doctors who who you want to talk with, and so for the patients, they get access that they wouldn't have otherwise had to medications. How do doctors benefit?
Well, the doctors can also be on the forefront of some of these medicines that are under development. So there's that component. In addition, they are able to also become, more on the research side have professional growth. If that's an interest to them, that would also just be embedded within the opportunity. And finally, community impact. You would be able to bring these treatments within your facility, or if you're with a hospital or a private clinic or whatever, these new treatments can be disseminated into the community through through you in this fashion.
It sounds to me like there's a lot of overlap between what these trials can provide to the community and the doctors, the patients, and perhaps where we leave off with. I mean, we've seen so many hospitals in the rural areas, especially close or be at risk of closing, and patients either have lost or are at risk of losing access to timely health care. And this seems like maybe a way of at least having some of that kind of brought back to them.
Absolutely, and great highlights. So one of the great approaches with working with physicians in rural communities, they are the front line for a lot of the patients within these communities. So bringing access to care through them will be a far more greater approach of reaching these populations than having to go to larger city centers of where you would have the larger hospitals and so forth.
So it seems like there's no losing part of it, side of this to the equation. Why hasn't this? Why aren't there more doctors doing these kind of things?
Great question again. A lot of it has to do with the transition of the way clinical trials are structured today versus even 10 years ago. And the other aspect, even if you take the infrastructure due to technological advancements, even, out of the way, data is starting to show that the need is, we haven't addressed going into rural communities. That's why the percentages are so low. And now the focus is, well, are we appropriately representing our, greater community and populations? Or are we really skewed in some way? Because there is a bias, and the whole premise of research is to alleviate bias. So we're trying to, now that we have the data, that this is an area that is being underrepresented, the focus is to bring more representation in these communities, and clinical research is taking that step in figuring out how to work with physicians in these communities, and even if they don't have the research background and the training, to bring the training to them in order to serve the communities with these cutting edge trials and treatments.
Sounds like you're very passionate about this. What do you love about what you do?
Advancements. When I first started working within clinical research, some of the mortality rates were just, I would see patients overnight and going through the treatment, and the success rates for even breast cancer, that today we have such a highly successful turnout, seeing that transition unfold is one aspect. Seeing the advances to target and screen so they don't even have to go into these late stage treatments is also something that I have been able to witness throughout the years. And it's just really exciting to, work toward a healthier quality of life we only have one, right? So let's make it as best as we can.
So it sounds like you love seeing patients get the care they need and not have to really suffer the consequences of having waited too long, where their disease requires much more invasive care, or with uh, less positive outcomes, and help people really get the care they need in a timely way, um, and also cost effectively, where they can actually afford it and not go bankrupt because of getting treatment. And
That's correct.
is there a story that sticks out the most to you from your experience?
Oh, great question. There's several. When I first started, when you first start to see patients, and I worked in the medical oncology branch at NCI, and some of the patients that would come through regularly for their follow-up visits, you start to recognize them, they know you, and there's a continuity of care that I would approach. So it it's definitely one of those where you just see even the youngest of children that are going through cancer treatment, and the maturity and the real appreciation of what actually matters in life, coming from a 9-year-old even,
Oh,
is something that really took me aback. Side story, and at NCI, there is a camp that we had also held for children, and that was called Camp Fantastic, that I went to. And it was cancer children that were really there for one another, going through all different stages of their treatment. So things like that definitely resonate and bring the passion even more to the forefront and drive.
and so I know you're based out of Florida. The doctors that you're working with, is it only for doctors who are in Florida as well, especially in the Panhandle, or is this a kind of, uh, would you be willing to talk with doctors outside of that area as well?
Absolutely open to speaking with physicians outside of the area. My focus for the underserved has been with a recent partnership with the Clinical Research Site Network, where we have targeted the Panhandle. However, separately, my organization, Phase One to Clinical Trial Career Success, I'm working with sites, CROs, and sponsors nationwide. So if physicians, even outside of the Panhandle, want to reach out to me, definitely open to partnering and working with different efforts if they align well.
And how hard is it for physicians to actually get started in this?
So that has been a really, we've streamlined that process to make it as easy and user-friendly as possible for the physicians. For physicians that have had no clinical trial experience, there's online training that can be self-paced to go through. And in addition, since I am located in the Panhandle, I would be able to work very closely with them in bringing them, the awareness for various different safety and efficacy questions that they might have. I have led multiple audits, so I'm very familiar with the regulatory aspects, and can surely help guide them, to make sure that we're in line with the good clinical practices.
So it seems like there's online training and perhaps other smaller aspects to it, but how long does it typically take to actually go from, let's say, knowing nothing about clinical trials, or at the very least, how to actually run clinical trials at, say, my office, to actually being well versed enough in it to actually start looking for either trials or kind of, I guess, how's that process unfold?
Sure, great question. So for a physician, sure, there is that online training, and that part is really patient care focused. And then there's a sub-investigator. So as a physician, you would be the principal investigator. There would be a sub-investigator partnered with you to really help guide you through that process until you are comfortable with, but that sub-investigator would still be your partner throughout. So it's not as if, oh, now you're good. They would consistently be there just to, you know, address some are time sensitive matters. So they would be your partner in making sure all of these visits and so forth would be logged in a timely manner, accurately, and any questions resolved according to trial procedures.
Okay, so it sounds like someone would be working with me to actually help bring me up to speed and actually make sure I um, answer any questions I have and I feel comfortable with the
Correct.
whole process.
Yes.
Um,
And yes, you would have a support system.
Very cool. Okay.
Yep.
And so, I'm sorry if I missed this. So, how long would you say typically, that training process? How long does that typically last for a physician?
You know, that is such a gray question to respond to, depending on the complexities of a trial that we're bringing on in the therapeutic area as well. So, an example would be a oncology trial might be a little bit more complex versus you could say a dermatology. If it was just if it was something that was a liquid tumor versus a solid tumor and so forth, and it doesn't have to just be cancer. It's just that's where I worked. So I always reference it. But it depends on the complexity and the different arms of a trial. And if we can, bring you on with a less complicated, it might take anywhere between 2 to 3 weeks of just, piecemeal. It's not full time, but it's, bringing you on as it's relevant. And if it's super complex, it might take up to 4 weeks, just two. So this is not full time by any means, but it's, as we get through the questions and bring you up to speed on some of the complexities depending on the trial.
Okay, so it seems like it varies, but roughly depending on the type of trial and the specialty, let's say it sounds like 4 weeks is kind of somewhere in the middle there, or towards or on the longer side.
Yes, and again, it's because you would have that support system there. So the main objective for the physician would be to care for the patient. The documentation part really is something that a support staff would be able to handle. The only training that might arise are clarifications, questions, how to be on top of what you need to be on top of as a checklist, just to make sure that your support staff is, because at the end, the physician is responsible for the entire, trial. So it's just managing your support team and just making sure you're asking all of the right questions. That's really the training component. And sometimes, depending on that trial, is the follow-up visit in 2 weeks or is the follow-up visit in 3 weeks? Okay, did you answer the questions that were presented in a timely manner? Things like that. That's the only training.
So it doesn't sound too involved. It's just kind of covering some basics and
That's right. We're making it as user friendly and as simple as possible, just to have the essentials of the trial under the responsibility of the physician, and then having the support team really take on some of the more administrative aspects.
And I know a big question, at least for me, would be, okay, so that sounds great as far as timeline and support and so on, but what about liability? So if I'm running this trial at my office, let's say, and then um, patients have adverse outcomes or something else happens, like um, what's the liability aspect of this like?
Right. So under the trial, if a patient even has a headache, let's say, there is an adverse event. I mean, there's adverse event codes and processes to log that in a time sensitive manner. That is part of just part of the practice. And so, so the staff that would be supporting the trials is very well trained in that and knows, okay, we need to report an adverse event in 72 hours. If it's a serious adverse event, 24 hours, no more. And there's procedures on just making sure who to alert when in that timely process. So everyone would be trained on that, including the physician.
And is there any out-of-pocket cost to the physician for kind of enrolling on any of these things or going through the training, things like that?
No, in fact, what we are really wanting to also bring to the attention of physicians, in addition to having additional patients come to seeing you, it would be, compensated. So for every patient that's enrolled and for participating in the trial, there is, a financial incentive on that aspect as well, because we do understand that that is taking some time to contribute to the trial during your other patients.
So the physician would be compensated for running these trials, running a trial. Um, what about recruitment for the trial? How does that happen?
Sure. Good question again. So, the clinical research site network that I'm partnered with, if this is in the Panhandle, there is a team of patient recruiters that would be focused on bringing those patients to the specific trials to your facility. So that's that's kind of worked into the clinical research site network. That's the nice part about being a part of a network, because we're really trying to expand and make it accessible for these patients in these communities.
So in the rural communities, as you mentioned, being able to get the patient, a lot of times there's long distances involved in going and getting care. Um, how do you overcome that in terms of getting your patients right to treatment or even being able to talk with them uh, on at regular intervals like the study requires, etc. Um, I'm sure there's a lot of logistical issues with these things for the patients.
Right. And that's really almost it depends on a few factors. The first is the type of trial and where within the community, if there's a partnership that's going on um, with a larger organization, we might be able to make accommodations, working collaboratively to bring that patient to and fro from for their visits. Um, Streamline those visits as much as possible if we need to, so that we're not burdening a patient that's already not feeling well into coming on site for a visit that otherwise might not require anything outside of question answer type of exchange. So minimizing the follow-ups is what I'm saying, if possible.
And with this, so does the physician have to, let's say, get new equipment for like telemedicine or for like do you provide, or how would they go about let's say, doing a telemedicine visit if needed, or even do they have to get like new, how would they go about structuring their office so that way, do they have to set aside one exam room to just for these trials?
No, not necessarily. But there, would need to be, well, first let me answer the seeing the patients in the space, and then I'll talk about the equipment. As far as seeing a patient, it's just as if you were scheduling a patient in your regular, regular day. And as long as you have space to do that patient visit, absolutely fine. Now, when it comes to bringing a trial on, prior to bringing it on, there's a whole process just to kind of make sure that the resources that are required to have the trial, your facility or you have access to. So it would not, and there wouldn't be a situation for you to bring on additional equipment. It's more, are you able to do the trial today with all of the requirements for the, in your, do you have access to what is required? And so that would, we would determine that prior to bringing a trial on.
So it sounds like you've worked with a lot of different places that you've been able to do these trials. And what's a real world example of, let's say, bringing a physician's office online? And are there any interesting studies that you've run across, in your experience with this?
I wish I could say that there's an interesting example for what we're doing right now. It's been a really interesting time, Sam, of where technology has allowed us to approach trials this way. So my experience has been working with larger facilities, on site versus, being able to work toward expanding these sites and really bringing these almost smaller sites, if you will, into the picture. It's never, it's mainly been prior to this, like 10 years ago, bringing all these people to one larger facility. So this is very
Wow.
exciting.
So this is really a relatively new way of doing things because it just wasn't possible. I mean, even 10 years ago, that's obviously very recent. So it'd be like basically before COVID, or just a little bit before COVID, really, this wasn't really an option.
Right. And a lot of it is because now we can, due to these technological advancements, we're able to really do a lot of screens and tests through labs and so forth. Much more. It's just a much more smoother process than it was, years past.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah. So.
So what are some of the myths that kind of permeate today's thinking that you'd like to address?
Um, that, when you're looking at trials, it's the trust factor that I had mentioned earlier. A lot of individuals who do not know what a clinical trial is are scared of what they don't know, or they may be scared of medicine altogether, or, some individuals are very, it's a challenge to bring them into even doing maintenance self-care, much less treatment.
Hmm.
That denial, factor. And I rather just, put my head in the sand and pretend like I don't have these things wrong with me than find out what it is. And it's just a mentality of, you know, making it, making it seem less burden to the patient, and also less risky by educating them on the trials. And that's part of, before any patient would even come on a trial, there is a whole consent and voluntary process of where the trial is explained to the patient, and that's to educate them on exactly what what this trial would ask of them, and what the process would be from day one to the end of trial for them, so that they're very clear and they can ask questions at any time of anything that's happening, and opt out at any point too. So that's all about developing that trust, and it takes a minute within a community, but also in a rural community, it's that trust almost spreads faster than the internet is sometimes, once folks go through a trial and they see how seamless it is, and so forth. So life, at the end of the day, they also do feel, before knowing what a clinical trial is, some individuals don't understand the impact that they would be making in tomorrow's medicine. And then by the time that they do finish the trial, they do understand, and it feels good to know that here we've been contributing also to the advancements in the best way that we can. So, but that's, I think, the biggest one is trust. And also that trials are, maybe not in rural communities, they're in urban or suburban communities. And I think that might also be because it's been so hard to access for individuals in these communities. And we're hoping to change that around as well.
So a lot of it really comes down to trust, and then a lot of that is just informing the patients about what's going on and really making sure they understand the process and kind of what to expect.
That's right.
Are there any incentives to the patients or to the doctors for, kind of for the initial, I guess, for starting it?
Sometimes there are. It depends on who the sponsor is for that trial. So, the type of treatment, and there are sometimes incentives for patients, whether it is the reimbursement of the travel costs that it might take, or whether it's lunch while they're there while they're on site or post. But there are sometimes, small incentives for the patient. It is really a fine line between incentivizing, the patient to participate in the trial, and then crossing a line of where it feels like where it leads to maybe that's the reason that they're participating in the trial. We don't want to create bias either. So, and as far as for the physician, there's really just the, depending on the success and enrollment of that trial, they will be compensated for that.
And for these offices that would be interested in doing studies, is there a difference in training between the different phases of trials? Let's say phase one versus like a phase three trial, or are there any other kind of things that they have to know before they really kind of step into that?
Great question. So for a phase one trial, you'll experience a smaller population size of patients, and it'll be more fast moving. And that's mainly because that's the start of developing the safety and effectiveness of a given treatment, and assessing any kind of adverse events or serious adverse events, things like that. As a trial starts to, go through the process of before it goes to market, the length of the trial will start to get longer, and the visits there'll be additional follow-up visits most likely as well, so you can check over time. And so that's really the only difference, is you'll see the earlier phases, more fast moving. The visits will be probably more frequent. The later phases will be slower. The visits will be more spread out.
So depending on the type of study, essentially, it's just the timing of the study or how long it'll be.
Yeah.
Really kind of matters, and how many patients they'll have will vary as well. How big of a burden is all of this on the physician's schedule? These days they're asked to uh, essentially they already have full schedules. It's kind of like they're on a treadmill while balancing, coffee in one hand, the chart in the other, and like a tray on their head. Um, how does all of this fit in with their busy schedules?
Well, it's really up to the physician to be able to identify for a given trial um, how many patients that they might have, to be able to screen and maybe possibly even enroll, qualify for the trial. And that would probably give them a good idea of the amount of time that they might need. Typically speaking, and it really, all of this is dependent on the trial and the trial arm and the schedule of the trial. So everything is variable, but in just general terms, screenings are probably the longest visits that will be there, and the rest of the follow-up visits, should be shorter than that. Anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes for follow-up visits, depending. And that really, I'm not sure what the burden is on a physician for their patients, their regular patients with that. Because I do know about the hamster wheel. So if you're so.
Yeah, I saw a picture of that somewhere, and it just kind of stuck with me. Just kind of the whole balancing act. And um, anything I've missed so far that you wanted to, the audience to know?
We've spoken about physicians and patients. Really, I definitely wanted to address the Panhandle community, but also any individuals even outside of the Panhandle. If they would like help resourcing their operations or are interested in clinical research, I'm open to discussing with them as well. But specifically to the Panhandle, I really did want to engage in this community and see, physicians that are interested and don't know how to get involved in clinical trial research, to be able to reach out to me, and they can email me at j@p1ctcs.org. And, I'm not sure if we'll be able to have like my contact details here, but to share those is fine. But there are organizations like Ascension, Gulf Coast, Health Point, HCA, Emerald Coast, all within this area, that if, there are physicians there, happy to communicate with them, to partner with them, even if they have existing networks, just to reach some of these communities surrounding that otherwise might have a hard time gaining access to these trials.
Wow. So yeah, we'll put a referral link, or not referral link. We'll put your contact information in the comments. After uh, the show, so people can see your email, and obviously reach out to you on LinkedIn as well.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you're really trying to make a difference for the people in the Panhandle of Florida, and really gives them the access or helps them get the access to life-changing medications that they can get.
Yes, that's right. I've focused on the Panhandle because I've recently moved to the Panhandle area, and the partnership that I have, um, I can I can really help them out with my on-site presence in this particular community, and that's going to work in alignment with their goals of reaching these underserved populations and my ability to work with individuals hands-on as that are surrounding here. But yeah, I mean that's part of it. It's expanding the network and getting more physicians involved, and trying to make that impact within the community that way.
Awesome. Well, Zai, thank you so much for being with me on the show today. It's been very informative for me, and I hope for the audience as well. And uh, we'll we'll post a comment with your contact information after the show, so people
Okay.
can know how to best reach out to you. And
Sure.
yeah, thank you so much for the informative conversation about bringing clinical trials to rural areas.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. This has been a great conversation. I'm happy to come back anytime and discuss any follow-ups.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure thing.